Prichard Colón walked into a boxing ring undefeated. With 16 wins and 13 knockouts, he walked out changed forever, spending the next decade of his life bedridden and cared for by his parents, before dying at just 33. Keep watching, because what happened in that ring changed his life, his family, and everything that came after. To understand what happened to Prichard Colón, you have to go back to October 17, 2015, at Eagle Bank Arena on the campus of George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. Colón, a Puerto Rican super welterweight fighting out of Florida, stepped in against Terrell Williams, an unbeaten prospect out of Los Angeles with a 15-0 record and 12 knockouts of his own. Both men were undefeated. Both men had everything to lose. Neither of them knew that night would end both of their careers in different ways. Colón had an unbeaten boxing career of 16 fights, with 13 wins by knockout. Prior to meeting with Williams, he'd just come off a win over former champion Vivian Harris a month earlier. He was rising fast. Some had him pegged as a future world champion. That's the fighter who climbed through the ropes that night. The fight itself became one of the most disputed nights in modern boxing. That night was marred by horrific refereeing and dirty fighting. Williams repeatedly punched Colón behind the back of the head, and he repeatedly told the referee about the infractions, who told him to take care of it himself. These are known as rabbit punches, strikes to the back of the head and neck, and they're illegal in boxing for a reason. They don't just hurt, they can kill. The complaints kept coming, and the referee kept letting it slide. During the bout, Colón repeatedly raised concerns about being hit on the back of his head, and reports indicate that he was struck with 72 such punches. 72 illegal shots. Not one or two mistakes in the heat of a fight. A pattern that went on for rounds, in front of a referee, in front of a ringside doctor, on national television. By the 9th round, the damage had already been done. After multiple illegal strikes to the back of the head, Prichard Colón was knocked down in the later rounds of their fight. He rose to his feet but complained of his dizziness between rounds. Despite this, he was cleared to fight by the ringside doctor, and he went out for another round. A fighter telling anyone who'll listen that his head hurts and that the world is spinning. And the response is, keep going. What happened next has become one of the strangest and most tragic footnotes in the sport. In round 9, he was disqualified, as his corner took off his gloves and stopped the fight themselves. His own team, trying to protect him, ended up triggering a disqualification loss instead of a stoppage, the only blemish on an otherwise perfect record, and it came from the corner trying to save his life. The bout was awarded to Williams in the 9th round on disqualification after Colón's team removed his gloves, with the fighter complaining of dizziness. Within minutes, everyone in that arena knew something was seriously wrong. After the fight, Colón began puking and was taken to the hospital where he was diagnosed with brain bleeding. As a result, he went into a coma for over 200 days. Different outlets have cited slightly different lengths for that coma. Some say 211 days, others 221, but every account agrees on the outcome. The Puerto Rican was one of the sport's rising stars when he was left comatose for 221 days, following a fight with United States boxer Terrell Williams in 2015. Doctors moved fast. Colón underwent surgery to relieve pressure on his brain, and the WBC said he sustained irreversible neurological damage because of what the governing body described as severe illegal blows to the back of the head. That phrase, irreversible neurological damage, is the hinge on which the rest of Colón's life turned. A 23-year-old with an undefeated record and a future in front of him was suddenly fighting just to breathe on his own. In the very first days, the updates coming out of the hospital tried to sound hopeful. Colón's family posted on his Facebook page that he was breathing without machines, calling it the glory of God, and asking for him to wake up. His promoter at the time, Lou DiBella, gave updates too, telling reporters the removal of pressure monitors on his brain was a good sign. Small victories, celebrated like touchdowns, because that's what the family had left to hold on to. But the fuller picture, once doctors understood the extent of what had happened, was far bleaker than anyone wanted to admit out loud. After awakening from the coma, the extent of Colón's neurological damage was fully understood, and he required round-the-clock care for the rest of his life. The young man who'd been knocking out opponents in the first round for years would now need help with almost everything: eating, moving, communicating. That's the setup. A fighter with everything ahead of him. a referee who wouldn't stop what was happening in front of him, and 72 illegal punches that changed the course of a life in less than 9 rounds. What came after? The years in that bed, the fight for accountability that never really landed, and the way his family carried him through more than a decade. That's where this story gets even harder to watch. Waking from a 200-plus day coma doesn't mean waking up whole. For Colón, opening his eyes again was really just the beginning of a different, much longer ordeal. One that would define the next 11 years of his life far more than his 16 professional wins ever had. The medical reality settled in fast. The injuries resulted in Colón being left in a persistent vegetative state and under family care. A persistent vegetative state is about as serious a diagnosis as exists in neurology, a condition where a person's eyes may open, where there may be some reflexive movement, but where full awareness and communication are severely compromised or absent. For a family, hearing that diagnosis attached to their 23-year-old son must have been almost impossible to process. And yet, almost immediately, the people around Colón refused to accept that as a final word. His mother, Nieves Melendez, and his father, Prichard Colón, himself a former trainer who'd guided his son's career from the amateurs to the pros, became his full-time caregivers. Nieves Melendez left, and Prichard Colón tended to their son, former professional boxer Prichard Colón, in his bedroom at his family home. That image, parents at a bedside in a converted bedroom, not a hospital ward, became the defining picture of Colón's life after boxing. Over the years, small updates trickled out, mostly through his mother's social media posts, each one treated like precious evidence that their son was still in there somewhere. One of the more widely shared moments came around his birthday, when his mother posted footage of him smiling. Prichard Colón's mother provided an update on his condition, sharing a video of her son celebrating his birthday, looking well on his way to recovery. In that clip, Colón can be seen smiling at the sight of a birthday cake while receiving a signed boxing glove from Puerto Rican music legend Daddy Yankee. Moments like that were rare, and the family clung to them, sharing them publicly not for sympathy, but as proof of life, proof of personality, proof that the man everyone remembered hadn't disappeared entirely. Physically, his condition required constant management. These days, Colón is taken care of by his mother and uses a motorized wheelchair to move. Photos from public appearances over the years, some from Winter Park, Florida, where the family lived, showed him being pushed or wheeled by his father, a stark image next to the old fight footage of him trading punches under bright arena lights. In images shared by his father online since the fight, he was often pictured in a wheelchair, being pushed by his father, Prichard Colón, in Winter Park, Florida. By 2018, the family had connected Colón with Brooks Rehabilitation, where he began an extended course of physical, occupational, and speech therapy that continued for years afterward. The staff there got to know him not as a patient number, but as a person with a personality that survived the injury in ways his body couldn't always express. Luke Davidson, who managed the outpatient center where Colón was treated, later described him as someone who was full of personality and continued to fight every day, and remained an inspiration for every patient and therapist who knew him at Brooks. Davidson added that his passion for life was contagious, noting he was as ready to play as he was to work, often dancing to music between exercises and challenging therapists to shadow boxing. That detail matters because it complicates the easy narrative of tragedy. Colón wasn't simply a body being kept alive, by every account from people who actually worked with him. There were flashes of the fighter still in there, still competitive, still finding ways to engage with the world around him, even after his ability to speak had been taken from him. At the time, Prichard Colón had not regained his speaking ability and continued to undergo physical therapy. He never spoke again, not in any account that made it into public record, but he reacted, he responded, he danced. His mother kept the public updated in bursts over the years, always careful with her language, always hopeful without overpromising. The family said he had made progress in his rehabilitation, with reports on his recovery journey continuing over subsequent years. Fans and boxing writers picked up on every fragment, a video here, a photo there, because Colón's story had become bigger than boxing. It had become a story people checked in on the way you'd check in on a family member. Even fellow boxers referenced him from a distance, using his story as a warning about the dangers of the sport. Heavyweight champion Deontay Wilder brought up Colón's name in press conferences over the years when discussing the risks fighters take every time they step into a ring. A small but telling sign of how deeply Colón's injury had embedded itself into boxing's collective memory. Cited as a cautionary tale even by champions who never shared a ring with him. The years piled up. 2018 became 2019, became the pandemic years, became a decade. Colón aged in that bed and in that wheelchair, celebrating birthdays that his mother documented, receiving visitors that included musicians and boxing figures, existing in a state that was neither the tragedy of an immediate death nor anything resembling the life he'd been building before October of 2015. It was something else entirely. A suspended existence that his family fought, year after year, to make as full and dignified as it could be. That fight for dignity ran parallel to another fight, one being waged not in a rehab center, but in a courtroom, where the Colón family tried for years to get some form of accountability for what had happened that night in Fairfax. That legal battle, and the way it dragged on without resolution, is its own chapter in this story. While Colón's body fought to hold on in that bedroom in Florida, his parents fought a different battle entirely. One aimed at the people they believed had let their son get hurt in the first place. That fight would stretch on for nearly a decade, and by the time Colón died, it still hadn't produced a clear resolution. The lawsuit came less than 2 years after the injury. The parents of former boxer Prichard Colón filed a lawsuit seeking more than $50 million from the ringside doctor and promoters connected with the August 17, 2015 bout in Fairfax, Virginia, that left Colón in a persistent vegetative state. This wasn't a quiet legal filing. It was a direct accusation that the people responsible for protecting a fighter inside that ring had failed to do their jobs. The complaint zeroed in on the ringside physician first. The complaint alleged medical malpractice by Dr. Richard Ashby for failing to act when Colón indicated several times that the back of his head hurt, and for not stopping the fight in the 7th round, when Colón reportedly told Ashby he was dizzy and had pain in the back of his head, after a Terrell Williams rabbit punch sent him to the canvas. In plain terms, the family argued the fight should have ended 2 rounds before it did, and that 2 more rounds of illegal punishment to the back of the head made all the difference between a career setback and a life sentence. The family's attorney, Ari Kasper, put it about as bluntly as it can be put. He told Outside the Lines that when you hear dizziness and pain in the back of the head after trauma, you send the patient to the hospital, adding that there's a heightened cause for alarm because you know he's going to be hit in the head for the remainder of the fight. Kasper argued the sum sought reflected the scale of what the family was now facing. He said the suit sought an unspecified amount exceeding $50 million. Because the cost of caring for a patient in Prichard's condition is astronomical, he requires around-the-clock care, and his pain and suffering is unimaginable. The lawsuit didn't stop at the doctor. It also went after the promotional side of the card. The suit further asserted that co-promoters Headbangers Boxing and DeBella Entertainment were negligent because they did not provide a physician with necessary qualifications, experience, and competence. Over the following years, the case expanded and narrowed as it moved between courts. Some filings also referenced the sanctioning body, asserting that officials failed to intervene when Colón showed visible neurological distress. The through line never changed. The core allegation remained that the systems meant to protect fighters failed Colón at multiple points. There was an official investigation too, separate from the family's civil suit, and it landed very differently than the lawsuit's framing. A state-commissioned review looked into the conduct around the fight and came back with a conclusion that avoided assigning blame to any single party. It found that while the outcome was tragic, there wasn't one action clear or serious enough to pin responsibility on one person. That finding effectively meant no individual, not the referee, not the ringside doctor, not the promoters, was going to be formally held to account through that particular process. It's part of why the family turned to civil court instead, seeking through a lawsuit what a state review hadn't delivered. But civil court, it turned out, offered no faster path to closure. Case filings moved, hearings happened, But a verdict never arrived. Nearly 9 years later, the lawsuit had no public verdict or settlement, leaving the family without legal closure. Think about what that means in practical terms. 9 years of a legal process that started when Colón was 23 and was still unresolved when he was pushing toward middle age. Still in that bed, still needing that same round-the-clock care the lawsuit had been filed to help pay for. Meanwhile, Terrell Williams, the man on the other side of those 72 rabbit punches, was navigating his own version of public judgment. He didn't stop boxing immediately, but the fight clearly followed him. Following the life-altering fight, Terrell Williams stepped back from the boxing ring for 2 years before resuming his career in 2017, competing in a few matches before eventually ending his career as a boxer in 2019. After that, he mostly disappeared from public life. Following his retirement, he has been keeping a low-key life, far away from the limelight. Williams did speak publicly about it once, in a 2018 interview, and his words became the closest thing to a public accounting anyone got from his side. He said he prayed for Prichard every day, and that would never change, that he wished him nothing but peace and health, and that no one wants what happened to Prichard to happen to anybody because all boxers are brothers, insisting he would never intentionally harm someone that way. He also pushed back on the intensity of public blame directed at him, saying there had been a lot of malicious things said about him, especially from the Colón family, and that if that's how they needed to cope and heal, then that's what it was. That's about as much closure as either side of that ring ever got. No verdict, no settlement, a state finding that spread the blame too thin to land on anyone, and a former opponent who said his prayers from a distance for a man he could never fully apologize to in public. The accountability the family sought when they filed that lawsuit in 2017 simply never arrived, not in 9 years. Not by the time Colón died in his home in Florida this past week. With no resolution in the courts and no dramatic recovery in the years that followed, life for the Colón family settled into a long, difficult rhythm. One built around care routines, therapy sessions, and small moments of connection, stretching from Colón's early 20s into his 30s. That rhythm is what makes the final chapter of his story, the one that just played out this month, hit as hard as it did. By the time Colón reached his 30s, more time had passed since the injury than he'd spent as a professional fighter. He'd been an active pro for roughly 2.5 years. He spent more than a decade in recovery. That imbalance says everything about what this story actually became. Not a boxing career cut short, but an entirely new, much longer chapter of life that his family built around him. The family never left Florida, and the home they built there became something between a residence and a full-time care facility. Photos and clips over the years, mostly shared by Colón's parents, captured pieces of that daily reality. Physical therapy sessions, birthday celebrations, visits from friends and public figures who hadn't forgotten him. Colón, once a promising prospect in the sport who'd been undefeated with 16 wins, 13 of which were knockouts, had been a thrilling success on the Puerto Rican, Dominican Republic, and American regional scenes before everything changed. That contrast between the fighter he'd been and the man his family now cared for daily ran through every single update. His mother, Nieves, became the most consistent voice, giving the public a window into his life. It was her posts, more than any press release, that people followed for years to gauge how Colón was doing. By every account, Colón showed steady but slow progress in recovering, and was taken care of by his mother, using a motorized wheelchair to move. Slow but steady became the phrase that defined more than a decade of his existence. Not a dramatic recovery, not a headline-grabbing miracle, just incremental, hard-won progress measured in small gestures rather than milestones. His father, Richard, carried a different kind of weight. As his former trainer, Richard had been the man who built Prichard's amateur career from the ground up, guiding him to a run of national amateur championships where he won 5 titles and earned a youth Pan American gold medal, all before turning 20. After the injury, that same man became his son's physical caretaker, pushing his wheelchair through public appearances, posting updates online, and eventually becoming the person who'd have to tell the world his son was gone. That moment came the second week of August. Prichard Colón announced his son's death on Facebook, and the language he used made clear This wasn't a sudden shock delivered by hospital staff. It was a father speaking directly to the community that had followed his son's story for over a decade. He wrote that he regretted to inform everyone of the passing of his son Prichard from this earthly world, adding that Prichard was now in a better world, thanking people for years of love and prayers, and asking that they keep the family in their prayers as much as they could. The cause of death wasn't disclosed publicly in the days that followed. A specific cause of death has not been publicly disclosed as of August 14. Given his medical history, most coverage connected the death to the long-term consequences of the 2015 injury, rather than treating it as unrelated, though nothing was confirmed in official statements. What is confirmed is the scale of the injury he'd carried for 11 years, and the toll that kind of sustained neurological damage takes on a body over that much time. The family's decision to care for him at home, rather than in a long-term institutional facility, was itself part of what made his story resonate the way it did. The family had spent more than a decade caring for Colón following his injury. That's not a small footnote. That's 11 years of turning a family home into a full-time medical operation. 11 years of birthdays and therapy sessions and small, hard-won smiles. 11 years of two parents refusing to hand their son's care over to anyone else. Word of his death spread quickly through the boxing community and beyond, in part because so many people had been following his story for so long that it had become almost a fixture. The kind of ongoing update people checked on the way you'd check on a relative. You hadn't seen in years, but still cared about. His death prompted tributes from boxing organizations, fans, and people who followed his family's years-long commitment to his care. What made this particular death land so hard wasn't just the tragedy of the original injury, that had already been public and painful for years. It was the fact that his family had built an entire second life around caring for him, day after day, for over a decade, and that life, in its own quiet and difficult way, had come to define him just as much as his 16 professional wins ever did. The man being mourned wasn't just a boxer who got hurt in 2015. He was a son who'd spent 11 more years being loved, cared for, and fought for by two parents who never stopped showing up. That 11-year story of quiet endurance is what makes the reaction from the wider boxing world, once news of his death broke, so significant, because it wasn't just about mourning a fighter. It was about recognizing an entire family's fight that had gone on far longer than anyone expected. News of Colón's death didn't stay confined to family and close followers for long. Within hours, statements started coming in from the very organizations that govern the sport he'd once been rising through, a sign of just how far his story had traveled in the 11 years since that night in Fairfax. Colón's death was confirmed in statements by the World Boxing Council and the World Boxing Organization. These are two of boxing's major sanctioning bodies, and their willingness to issue formal statements for a fighter who never won a world title and hadn't fought professionally in over a decade speaks to how much his story had come to mean beyond his in-ring record. The WBC's statement, delivered under longtime president Mauricio Suleiman, didn't hedge on how it framed him, with a heavy heart and immense sadness enveloping the entire international boxing community. The World Boxing Council and its president, Mauricio Suleiman, mourn the passing of former boxer and icon of bravery, Prichard Colón Melendez. The organization said, describing him elsewhere as an eternal champion. The WBO's tribute leaned into the same theme, that whatever title Colón never won in the ring, he'd earned something else in the years that followed. The WBO described Colón as a warrior until the very end, and said his courage, strength, and fighting spirit transcended the ring. Before the fight against Williams, Colón collected 16 straight wins, including 13 knockouts. But the organization's tribute made clear that the ledger boxing fans usually use to measure a fighter, knockouts, title defenses, records, wasn't the one being used to remember him. The WBO added that his greatest fight became a testament to resilience and the unwavering love of his family. That phrase, his greatest fight, lands differently depending on how you read Colón's story. It wasn't the fight against Williams that got invoked as his defining moment. It was the 11 years that came after. The daily, unglamorous, uncelebrated fight to simply keep going, carried as much by his parents as by Colón himself. Beyond the sanctioning bodies, Tributes came in from fans, from fighters who'd followed his story for years, and from the rehab professionals who'd worked with him directly and knew him as more than a headline. The staff at Brooks Rehabilitation, who'd spent years working alongside him, had already put into words what so many people who actually spent time with him seemed to agree on: that whatever the injury had taken, it hadn't taken the parts of him that made him who he was. For Terrell Williams, the news likely reopened something that had never fully closed. He'd spent nearly a decade managing the weight of being permanently linked to Colón's injury, saying in that 2018 interview that he prayed for Prichard every day and that it would never change. Whatever Williams's private response to the news of Colón's death was, it arrived at the end of a story that had shaped both of their lives in opposite but permanently connected ways. One man who never spoke another public word, and one man who never stopped being asked about the night that changed both their lives. The unresolved lawsuit remains exactly that, unresolved. 9 years without a verdict or settlement means the legal question of accountability that Colón's parents raised in 2017 is still, as of his death, an open one. Whether that case will now be pursued differently, settled, or quietly closed with Colón's passing is something that hadn't been reported in the days immediately following his death. What is clear is that the family's original argument, that a fight that should have been stopped in the 7th round was allowed to continue into the 9th, with irreversible consequences, never got its day in front of a jury, and now never will with Colón himself alive to be part of that reckoning. What Colón's story leaves behind is less about boxing rules or even legal accountability, and more about what an entire community decided to do with over a decade of watching a young man's parents refuse to give up on him. Every birthday video his mother posted, every therapy session photo, every wheelchair image from a public appearance. Those became, over 11 years, a different kind of record than the one he built in the ring. 16 wins, 13 knockouts, and then 11 years of being loved and fought for by two people who never stopped showing up for their son, right up until the day they had to tell the world he was gone. That's the fuller picture of what people meant when boxing's own governing bodies called him a champion this month, not for what he did between the ropes, but for what came after, and for the family that carried him through every day of it.